Okay, I'm gonna mute everyone and let's get going. So I'm gonna pick up where we left off with Git. I'm gonna start sharing my screen. And we were looking at the file system. We were playing with creating some text. So I went ahead and created 2 different files on the command line. You can do the same thing in another application. There's no easy way in like Finder to create a new file unless maybe you have an extension. You can create a new folder. That works. So I could create a folder here and say test folder. If I were to do ls back in the terminal, I'm going to see that I have a test folder. So you should see that as well. Yours may be colored, it may not be colored. There's different ways to customize terminal. That's something that we can work on at a later time. Right now, I just want to focus on the basics, and that's we've got 3 files here. Another thing that we can do to show files is if we type ls, there's I typically do, I think it's LA. And this is really big, so let me make it a little smaller. There's different flags that we can use for almost all of these commands. And this is going to list all of the files and give me additional details. It's kind of like the detail view in Finder. When I switch over to detail view, it just gives us a little bit more insight. This tells us about file permissions over on the left, which I'm not going to be worried about right now. It tells me who made the file, who owns the file. There's a creation date. This should be, I think, the number of bytes big that these different files are. And then what we're going to see are some dots here. So this is going to show me a few more things that I don't see if I just do a normal ls. If I do a normal ls, it just shows me just this. But if I do a ls-la, and you can go ahead and try that, it will show me the dot, which stands for the current directory, 2 dots, which stands for the directory above this directory. And then we're going to see .dsstore. .dsstore is a special file that's created by Finder anytime we have a Finder window open for a folder. And then we're going to see a README, a test, a folder, and then our test.txt. .dsstore is a special file. It starts with a dot. Any file that starts with a dot is typically not displayed when we do the ls command, or if we're looking in Finder. There's ways to turn that setting on. I do not have it enabled. I don't like seeing those files, but it's up to you. If you want, you can Google how to enable that. I'm not going to cover that right now. But what I am going to cover is how we can start using Git on the terminal. So I want you to be in your test Git directory. So make sure you cd to this directory to review some of the commands that we used. I can type clear and it will clear everything on the screen. If you want to go back to one of the commands that you previously did, that's the history command, which will show you everything you did. You can sort of scroll backwards in time and look for that command if I talked about something that you want to reuse. You can clear that again to clear the display. The PWD is kind of like where am I? This is print working directory. This will show us our folder path so that we can know how to get here. So I can always type cd, and then if I wanted to, I could type users, Paul Solt, desktop, and this will navigate me to my desktop. If I want to go into that test Git folder, I need to cd into that test Git folder. So I want you to be here. You can't copy exactly what I write because it's going to be specific. But somewhere on your system, you should have a test folder. I want you to get inside of that using the cd, which stands for change directory. And once you're inside of it, then we can try ls, which will show us the files. All right, so when we're working with Git, we have a series of commands. So all of these commands, these are all of the commands that I'm running by typing them. It's just like opening an app on your iPhone. except these are text-based commands, these are text-based programs, these are text-based applications that there is no visual necessarily. We're not seeing the visual representation. It's somewhere on our computer, it's in a special folder, and we can run these different commands. Well, Git is the same type of thing. It's another tool that was developed by Linus Torvalds, and this has been around for a while, and it's an open source project that people can contribute to, and there's multiple features within Git. So when we're working with Git inside of Xcode, it's under the hood working with Git, the command line tool. And it's using this tool to do all the different operations. And that's where we can get into some bugs within Xcode where Apple's developers haven't quite coded it correctly, or sometimes things can fail and they don't handle the error conditions. And so that's where you can get into some weirdness. So if you're ever having an issue, like we talked about earlier before we just resumed, creating a new Xcode project is probably the safest bet in starting over again. Anytime I'm learning something new, I start over from scratch if things aren't working. There are a lot of failure points. We saw a lot of them if you were trying to follow along yesterday. Some of you got everything working, some of you didn't. And that's because it's hard to follow with all of you watching and trying to not hit a glitch or a bug or click the wrong thing. So I want you to try and follow along as best you can. But when we're talking about Git, this has a lot of different commands, and you can see this is very verbose. This shows us the usage statement. You're going to get used to statements tell us how we can interact with a tool. Command line based, which means we have to type out exactly. To turn knobs or levers, we use these parameters that we can pass into. It's kind of like calling a function in Swift. We can pass different information, we can pass different settings, and it will do whatever we want. So you have to get used to reading these types of statements. And when we read something like this tells us sort of what we can do with this command. So I want you to try and do the Git version. So if we do a -- version, that should display what version of Git we have on your computer. So I'm going to type git -- version, and it will show me that I'm running 2.20.1. Now yours might be different depending on if you've updated that or if you're on a different version of Mac OS. That's totally A-okay. As long as you're using something that's similar in number to mine, you should be pretty good to go. And I think if you've got Xcode 10 installed, you should be fine. Okay, so that's one of the commands that we can run. Another command we're going to see is clone. We'll also see init today. We will see add and git log. This is going to be a text-based version of what we saw in Xcode. And I think we'll see a couple other commands today. I'm not going to go over everything as there is a lot to learn with Git, but this is where you can come back to if you want to learn more. You can always just type Git on the command line, or you can open the manual page. To open the manual page, Git should have a manual page unlike CD. So if I type man, which is short for manual, and then Git, this will tell me everything I need to know about this command. This is really useful for reading. It helps to have the right width so it doesn't word wrap incorrectly. And you can press spacebar to sort of scroll through this list. When you want to quit out of a man page, just press the Q button. So if I press Q, it quits, and I'll do that one more time. If I type man git and I want to look through this stuff, I can look through. I can also use the arrow keys to move up and down, and I should be able to page up and page down. Which key is that? If you hold the function key, I believe you can page up and page down. So this is something you can play with more later. I just want to sort of give you some exposure so that you sort of know that these things exist. You can always come back to this video and sort of rewatch and try to follow along again. I think it's going to be really beneficial. As we don't really have any videos that I think, cover all of these commands sort of step by step. So what I want to do is I'm going to type clear, and I want to create a new Git repository. So I want to make sure I know where I am. So I always type pwd as sort of a sanity check. Okay, where am I? And this is exactly where I want to be. I'm in this new folder we created. I can look and see what's in here, and that's great. So what I want to do is I'll type git init. Now git init will initialize the empty Git repository. This is exactly what Xcode did when we did that menu option. This is exactly what Xcode does if you hit that checkbox on the initial creation of your project. We just did that. I have some fancy stuff set up. It's going to look a little bit different on mine. I've got some text coloring here. That's part of my Bash profile. I might be able to talk about that later if you remind me, but I don't want to go into that right now. I want to show you some of these commands. So you should see something that looks somewhat similar to what I have here. So we have an empty Git repository, and this is basically, this has now enabled change tracking. So this is like going into Word and enabled change tracking. So if I type git status, this is going to tell me exactly what's going on with this particular folder. So a Git repository is going to be localized to this folder. Now we're not going to see, there's a hidden file that I'm not going to see here, and it's the .git file. We can see it if I type ls-la. This will show me all of the files, including the hidden file, and here we will see a .git folder. This is where all of the change information is actually stored. And we have this concept of a working copy, a sort of a staged area, and the overall history with our Git repository. So it's going to be managing all of that different things. So right now, my working copy has some new files, and two of these files I really care about. One of them I don't really want to include, so I'm not going to include it. And we have a way for sort of avoiding certain files using what's called a git ignore. I don't know if I'm going to cover that right now. Probably once we get onto GitHub, I'll talk about that, since that'll be easier. So with this, when I want to stage something to track it, I need to add it. And so since we have a README, and I can open this one up, if you just right-click on one of these two files that you have in Finder, you can open them in, you should be open, I'm assuming you have TextEdit, or you might have a Markdown editor. Visual Studio Code is a good option. We can talk about more text editors after the class. If one of the PMs wants to sort of keep a list of things that I want to talk about, could you write down talking about Visual Code and Bear and some of the other Markdown tools? So those are different tools. So I want you to open that file. I'm going to open it up in what I like to use, which is Multi-Markdown Composer. And then I can go ahead and edit. So I can add a title at the top. I can write text. I can indent one time, and I can write var x equals 10, so I can have some code snippets. And I can make something bold text if I select it. Or actually, that's going to italicize. If I do double, it will be bold text. So we can just add some text. You don't have to write exactly what I write here. You just need something. So I want you to go ahead, add some stuff to that, and let me move this around.
How did you get README open?
I just opened it with Finder, but you can do the same thing. If you type open.readme.md, it should open with your default editor, and your default editor should be TextEdit unless you've installed something. Okay, so what I want to show you now is with git status, it's going to show us, again, the state of all the files. So I can see that I have the README and the test. Now, neither of these are being tracked for changes. So in order to track them, I have to add them. And that's what this message is telling me. It's really important that when we're using command line tools that we read what they say and sort of learn to understand what they're saying. And sometimes they give us hints, like this one tells us to use the add command to give hints. I should be able to type git help add, and this will give me information on how the add command works. Again, there's a lot of different parameters that we can provide and customize it. And you could also use, it looks like your scroll wheel or two fingers to scroll through this. When you want to leave a manual page, just press the Q button. And if you are starting to type, let's see. I don't know if this works for this. No, it doesn't. There is on modern track MacBooks that have that fancy touch bar. If you're typing a command, it will do a little pop-up, and if you tap that on the top of by the escape key, it will bring up the manual page in a separate window, which is another way to get that. But don't worry if you don't have that. You can just type manual to get it, or you can type git help add. This will bring you to the manual page for it. And remember, when you're on a manual page, press Q to leave it. Okay, so I want to use the add command, and what I need to provide is a file that I want to add to it. So I'm going to type git add and then readme. And I can use tab to autocomplete if there is a file that matches, just like we can use autocomplete in code. And then I can press enter. So doing that, if I type git status, we are going to see that we have a new file. So the status is going to look different when you run it. Hopefully you'll see that there's a new file in green and you've got some color coding. It's okay if you don't have color coding, but it can make it a little bit easier to read. And then we'll still see that we have some untracked files. So if I'm going to add an initial README, I want to have a commit message. And so we can do the same thing that we did in Xcode, except on the command line. Once we add the file, this is kind of like hitting that checkbox in Xcode. Now I need to actually do the commit with the commit message. To do that, we're going to use the commit command. And if you want to learn more about that, you can type git help commit. And if you press enter with this one, we will see a bunch of information about how to use this. Again, reading over this will be helpful. It is a little dense, so it can be hard to understand. I think going through the motions a little bit will help. And as you try to do more advanced things, going back to the documentation is really helpful. So now what I want to do is I want to commit. So I'm going to type git commit, and I want to give it a message. Well, there is a flag for commit if we give it a -m that stands for message. And then in double quotes, I need to write whatever I want to write, like I would do in the text field in Xcode. So here I'll say added a basic README with markdown syntax. Now your commit message might be different. You can use mine. That's totally fine. This is just a demo. So don't worry exactly what you write. We just need to write something. All right, so the syntax is important. Once you have your message, you're going to press enter, and we should see some visual feedback on the terminal. We should see that we have a hash that represents this change, and then we'll see our message, the starting point of it. You won't see all of it. And then we should see how many files were changed, how many lines were changed. And then it'll tell us that it created a new file. So now if I type git status, we now see that that file readme.md is no longer in this list. If I want to add another file, I have this test.txt. I can open test.txt, and I think I started to write something before we left, but you can go ahead and add something. So I'll just write a couple lines of text. It doesn't really matter what this is. I just need you to have another file to work with. And then what I want to do is I want to add this as well to the repository. So we want to keep the changes, and we'll have another log message. So what I need to do is, I know if I do git status, this always gives me sort of the source of truth. So git status shows me right here what files are being modified. And in this case, it's showing me untracked files. If I want to add any of these, I will add them. So in this case, I want to say git add test.txt. And that will add that file. If I do a git status to do a sanity check, I could see that it is added. It says it's a new file. And now I want to commit it. So I'm going to do another commit message. So git commit -m, and then in double quotes, we write our commit message. So added a test text file. Once you do that, you just press enter, and it will create a new file. It will be tracked in the Git repository. And so basically, it's going to be tracking any changes we make to these files from now on. So if I type git status, we should see that the only thing that we have here is this dsstore file. And this dsstore file is here because we've opened Finder window to it. So I guess I will show you how to, let's create a git ignore file. I'm going to, let's see, touch.gitignore. So this is a special file that starts with a period, and it's gitignore all lowercase letters. And then I'm just going to say open.gitignore, and hopefully this will open it in your text editor. And then all I want you to do is just type in star dot, and then we're going to type what we see over here. So we're going to copy this or just rewrite it. So it should be star.dsstore. And this is just a simple way to make this file ignored. The star is what we call a wildcard character. This means it matches any file name. And in this case, it can also match a blank. So since there's nothing on the other side of this dot, it just matches against dsstore. Technically, I could probably omit this, but it's just sort of something that we would do. If I wanted to ignore all PNG files, I could do something like this, star.png, and it would ignore any image file by default. Though I typically wouldn't want that in a repository, so I'm not going to do that. All right, so if I save that and then I do git status, we're going to see that dsstore is no longer mentioned, and we see that we have a new file that is the gitignore file. So by writing this right here, we're now making it so we want to say, okay, don't worry about these Finder files. They don't exist on Windows. We don't want to worry about them. Don't add them to the repository. It's not important. So the next thing I want to do is I want to add this gitignore. So I'm going to do a git add.gitignore, and I'll use tab to autocomplete. And it should give me the suggestion, and then I'll press enter. If I do a git status, we'll see that we have a new file. And now I'll commit this again with the -m. So git commit -m, and then I tell it what I did. So added dsstore to gitignore. And then I'm going to press enter, and we'll have another change. So if I write git status, now we should see a message that says on branch master, nothing to commit, working tree clean. The working tree is my current directory. So that's everything that we see when I'm looking at the files in Finder. Nothing has now changed. This test folder is actually not under version control. Folders by default are not under version control. We add files to the version control. So right now it doesn't see that even though the file is there. So if I were to do ls, we would see the three files, or I guess the one folder and two files. And now what I want to show you is how we can make a change. So let's jump into our README file, and let's just add a line of text. I'll just say hello iOS6. And then I want to change the line of code up at the top. I'm going to say x is equal to 1000. So I'll make two changes. I will save them in my text editor. And then I'm going to go back to terminal, and I'm going to type git status. This will show me anything that has been modified. And now it's telling me that I have changes that are not staged for commits. So if I want to track this new change, this is kind of like doing another commit again in Xcode. I need to tell it to add the files by hitting those checkboxes. If I want to see what's changed, I can quickly glance at that by doing a git diff. As long as it's red and it's not staged, it will show me all of the changes. Now Git is pretty verbose, but it's also compact. And so it's going to show me what is different in the file. And what we're going to see is some notations. It will tell me which file has been changed, and if there's been additions or deletions. And so in this case, it considers everything sort of line by line. So it's telling me, it's giving me some context. So if we look at this, we can see some context around the change. So it's giving me a couple lines of context. And then it's showing me that the line var x equals 10 was removed, and a new line was added, var x equals 1000. And then again, we're going to see some changes down below. And so it's showing me another change, and it's saying, for some reason, it's saying that I added, I guess, 3 lines of code. I don't know if maybe I didn't save it correctly for the last commit. So these 3 lines were not added. So it is showing me this change. And it's saying I added 3 lines. When we see a plus, that means we have 3 new lines. So if I want to add this to Git to track, if I like this change, I will do git add and then the README. And if I do git status, it will show me that I've modified it. The last step is to do the commit. So it's sort of a 2-step process, maybe a 3-step process. You want to check what's changed. Then you want to add those changes that you want to commit. And then you want to do the actual commit. So I'll say git commit -m, added a hello message and changed X. Okay. So we'll write this, we'll press enter. It'll tell us that 1 file changed, 4 insertions, 2 deletions. Any questions so far?
Yeah, I got lost, I think, before lunch, but I have questions that can get me back on track. So what we're learning right now is how to just manipulate files using terminal. Like this README file has nothing to do with the project we did before lunch, correct?
Correct. It was just, we left off creating this directory, and it's to show you how these commands work. So it's not magical, because you will be required to use this type of interface with app development. So we can't do everything in Xcode.
Okay, and then would it be possible to just get a brief rundown of the commands that we've gone over so far?
You want to see all of these?
I got you. Yeah. So if I take each one of those, I can look them up and they'll tell me like what they did.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I tried to do the ones, I just input what you had input when I was reading it in the Slack, and I didn't know what I was doing. So I think I like missed a step somewhere, and I don't know which one it was or whether it was important and all these things.
Yeah, I'll share this to Slack.
Perfect. Thank you.
And then on Slack, we do have a new questions thread if you guys have more questions. So that's kind of a rundown of working with Git on the command line. The common ones that you're going to use, again, to just reiterate, are Git status. This tells me how things are looking, if I've made any changes. If I were to delete these lines of text, let's take out, what do I want to take out? I'll take out write text. That's going to cause a change. I'll save the file. If I do a Git status, we're going to notice that it's different. If I want to see what's different, I do a git diff. Diff gives me the difference between two different file changes. So it's kind of like looking at the change tracking in a Word document, except it's all text-based and it's going to show me what changed. So here I took out 2 lines. I took out the write text line and I took out the new line that was after it. The other lines that we're seeing are just context. So it gives me, it looks like in this case, it's giving me 2 lines of context above and 3 lines of context below. So that's just useful when you're trying to read it. This is why I like working in a visual editor. So like when we do a commit in Xcode, if I do Command Option C, I can see visually what has changed. So I can see that the storyboard has changed. This is not very useful to look at. This is a lot more useful to look at. So here I can see, okay, looks like there was some white space change. And if I wanted to, I could edit this and I could say print hello. And this would be another change. So this in my mind is a little bit easier to read, but I think you should be comfortable with looking at both. I personally prefer looking at it in this interface, but I still am comfortable on the command line. So doing this, having these checked is the same as adding it to Git using the terminal, and then writing the message down here is the same as what we've done with writing those new messages in terminal. So if I do Git status, this is still here. It's not staged. So if I want changes to be considered for, and I want to include them in a commit, then I'm going to add them. So that's the first step that we do. We add them usually one at a time. We can add multiple files at a time, though you have to be careful that you don't add files that you don't want. But always double check with a Git status to see what has changed. And if that's acceptable, then you do your commit. So it's git commit -m, and I said I did some kind of edit, removed a line of text. All right, so this is all fun and dandy, but this code is not something that I'm sharing with anyone else. This is locally. I'm just tracking changes locally. It's a lot more useful when we can collaborate in a team. And so a lot of times we are going to be working on projects where we want to collaborate with our code. And so in order to do that, we're going to use GitHub. So you should have a GitHub account. And I think what I want to try and do is get our About Me page onto your GitHub profile. So I am going to just do this final commit. I had modified things when I was working with some of the students. So my changes are a little bit different from where we left off in class. So I'm just going to say updated the constraints and white space. If I wanted to, I could discard this change, and I might actually do that just for fun. So let's see if this works. I will click on this little drop down in the very center of Xcode on the commit screen, and I will discard this change. if I were to refresh, sometimes this doesn't show that nothing has changed now. I can uncheck it to be sure, or I can hit cancel. And if I do the source control commit screen again, we shouldn't see that file is being modified anymore. So I'll just commit the constraints have been modified, and look at that, it's telling me 2 files have been modified. That's weird. So I'm gonna update this and we should be good to go. So your About Me project, we're gonna try and get this on GitHub. This may or may not work for you depending on if you know your password and have things set up correctly. So we're gonna try and get this working. But if there's issues, I just want you to sort of try and follow along. And you can rewatch this video to see what I do.
Paul, you used git add a bunch of times before you committed. Do you need to do that before you commit, or is it that was just a different?
Yeah. So if I look at my status, there's nothing changed here. If I were to modify that file one more time, if I do git status, we see it's modified. If I do git commit -m, updated readme, and it tells me that changes are not staged for commit. No changes added to commit. So in order to make a new commit, we need to have changes. And just because I've made the changes doesn't mean that I've accepted that I want them to be staged. So we have this concept of staging commits. It's kind of like anytime you've got sort of a list of changes, you've got to put them in maybe a bucket or something. And then that's kind of the concept of staging the changes. And then when we commit, we're kind of like...
Well, commit is like the bucket, and you're sticking something in there with add, and then you just empty the bucket onto GitHub.
Kind of. It's kind of like, I would say it's more like tagging the bucket as a list of changes. So we would label the bucket and then put it in a shelf so that we could come back to it if we needed to. Okay. Can I get, and you can post this on Zoom, can I get a 1 to 3 rating in the chat on how comfortable you are with what we've talked about in terms of Git and sort of following along? So 1 means that you have no idea what you're doing, 2 means that you sort of understand, and 3 means that you really understand how to use this. Awesome. Good job, everyone. This is a little challenging. I would say it's a little sometimes theoretical because we don't fully understand how things are working yet. But if you just sort of bear with me and work on this, this is a really helpful system when we're trying to collaborate with code. So if you ever want to do any pair programming, which is an option, understanding how to work with Git in a team is a really, really, really valuable skill. So now what I want to try and do is go over to GitHub, and hopefully you know what your password is, and if you don't, I would recommend that you sort of write that down so that you can refer to it. I don't know if the first time we do these commands, it should save our password, but sometimes it doesn't. And if you have 2-factor authentication on, that's going to make this a little bit challenging. So I'm not going to cover 2-factor authentication for the setup or integrating. So hopefully you have your password to GitHub because we're going to need that next. Now, in terms of password security, I highly recommend using an app like 1Password to track your passwords and generate passwords. I use this all the time. It has extensions for Chrome as well as Safari so that I can insert passwords into different things. So if I look up GitHub, I can see the different sort of passwords and things that I have for it. So with this, it allows me to track my username, a password, and I can even regenerate the password if I need to. So there's an option to copy it to my clipboard so that I can paste it somewhere. I also have two-factor authentication, which I'm not going to cover, but that's what this little thing is. There's an alternate way you can do it with a cell phone number as well, using SMS text messages. So find your password, and let's jump on over to GitHub. So if you go to github.com, that's going to take you hopefully to your profile page. And then what we're going to look for is we want to create a new repository. There's a couple places to do this. So there's this new button over on the left. If I look in the top right, there's also a new repository. And if I actually go to my profile, they've changed this a little bit. So I don't know if my profile is a different screen. I don't think there's another button on this screen. So I'm going to hit the plus button in the top right, and I'm going to select new repository. And I'm going to call this About Me. So hopefully that name is going to work. You should see your name. If you're part of multiple organizations, you can choose which one you want to add it to. So I'm going to add this to my personal GitHub account, and it's going to be called About Me. I want to try and commit our code that we worked on today to GitHub. For the description, this is a optional thing where you can describe what it is. I highly recommend filling this in. So for this one, what would you call our project today? Anyone have a suggestion?
I just called it day 2 class project.
Okay.
Should it have some reference to Git?
It could. We could say something about with my name and hobbies. So whatever you want to write that's going to give it a little bit of clarity, I think is useful. If I were to ask you in 6 months, what's day 2 class project, that's not very meaningful. So I think having some context is helpful. Granted, this is pretty much a toy project. It doesn't really do much. So there's not much to this, but as we work on more complicated apps like the one that we worked on yesterday, you could talk about that in more detail. So yesterday we created basically a GPS location tool. And so you could write something like that. For public or private, you have the option of letting other people see. I'm going to keep this one public so that you guys can see it. And then private is what I would use if I was working on an internal app. So I've got multiple apps on the App Store. All of them are in private repositories, and that's just for me to work on. And if I've hired interns or if I work with someone else as a collaborator, I can invite them to work on that project with me. For the bottom, it's really important if we want to add an Xcode project that we've already created with Git, that we do not add a README and don't add the git ignore, don't add the license. We can add all this stuff later if we need to, but checking any of these will prevent us from uploading our Xcode project that's already under Git version control. So I want your screen to match exactly what I have, make it public, and do not check anything on the bottom. With that, I'm going to hit the button to create the repository. And this is going to give me some instructions on how I can set this up. So for probably most of you, you're going to use HTTPS. If you have SSH set up, you can use that. Because I have two-factor authentication, I'm going to need to use the SSH version. But you can toggle this between whichever one is going to make sense. If you're just getting started and you have your password for GitHub, I highly recommending starting with the HTTPS option. So this is going to sort of cover some of the commands that we've already done. So this is how you would create a new repository locally and then connect it to GitHub. These are the commands that we have to go through. We've done all of these sort of top commands. We haven't done these commands. So since we have an existing repository, we will look at this existing repository section. What we'll need to do is we have to add what's called the remote, which is basically telling our computer, our local copy of the project, that I want to add this online version with GitHub so that I can push this up into the cloud. That way you can see it, you can collaborate with me on my project, and you can modify it and create your own variants. So what we're going to try and do is we're going to navigate to where our About Me project is. So my About Me project, if I right click on it and I say Show in Finder, this is, where did I save this? I saved this in my projects folder on my desktop. If you don't see this drop down, I'm going to show you a quick tip on Finder of how to add this. If you right click on the toolbar and you click Customize Toolbar in Finder, so that's a right click on the toolbar, look at my screen. I right click here, I say Customize Toolbar. There is a path option. On my screen, my icons are sort of jiggling. If I drag the path option up, it's right here. If I drag this up, that will add it, and that helps you know where you are. I'll then hit Done, and now this gives me a quick reference to where I am on my system. So what I'm going to do now is in Terminal, I want you to go to wherever the directory is. If you save this to your desktop, I want you to, let's do a CD. This will take us to our home directory. If I do ls, that shows me all the folders. I'm going to go into the desktop. I'm going to go into my projects folder. If you have a capital P, use a capital P. I have a lowercase. And then I'm going to look for my About Me. In here, I am now inside of a new Git repository, so I can write Git status. This will show me anything. The one command I haven't shown you yet is how to log. If I do Git log, this will show me all of the changes. So I can see all of the commits, which have these sort of hexadecimal special codes, and then they have who did it with my email address associated with GitHub, a date stamp, and my messages. If I want to exit this, I press Q. So if I do Git status, it's going to tell me that nothing has been done here. What I'm going to show you is a new command now, git remote-v. This will, git remote-v. This will show me all of the sort of online cloud endpoints. V is for verbose, and there's nothing set up. So this is where the tips from GitHub are really helpful. I'm going to have this both up on the screen. I'm going to run this first command. So you can copy and paste this, or you can write it yourself. I'm going to write it myself to give you some time. So we're saying I want to add an origin, which is going to be the server that we're pushing our code to, that we're sending our code to. And I'm going to send this to github.com. Then I give it my user account. Your user account is going to be different than mine, so you can't use mine. And then I'm going to give it the title, aboutme.git. That's a long line, so it might word wrap. That's totally fine. As long as you copy and paste that correctly, it should add it. I'm going to press enter, and there's no response, no visual feedback, but if I want to see if I have any remotes, I just do this remote-v, and it will show me that I have now an origin set up, and I have the ability to fetch, which means pull down changes from the cloud, and I have the ability to push, which means I can send changes to the cloud. So the last thing that I want to do is I want to run this command, git push-u origin master. So I'm going to type that out. And what this is doing, I'm currently on the master branch. It has been telling me that every time I do a git status. So I'm saying I want to push my changes, and this is adding the branch that I'm on and pushing it to the origin. So when I do this command, it will finish setting it up for me, and it's going to want me to authenticate. And I don't think this is actually going to work this way for me, but this should work for you. So you'll type in your GitHub username, and mine is my email address at Gmail. So I'll press enter, and then it's going to want my password. But since I've got two-factor authentication, this actually is not going to work for me. So I'll type something, and it's just not going to work. So it should work for you. Can you raise your hand if it worked? And otherwise, let me know if it didn't work. I'm going to follow along with SSH because I have SSH set up. So my link is going to start with a different starting point. You'll notice that these two strings are slightly different. This starts with HTTPS. This starts with just git. So my command, I'm going to have to do this again. And so the first command that I did, this is removing the origin because I have to re-add it. I don't want you to follow this if it's working. I'm going to re-add using this step, and I'll just copy and paste that. And then I will try and push. So if it is connected, then you should see that it's going to tell you that it found some objects and some data. It's compressing it. It's writing that, and it's then sending it up to GitHub. And it's going to say it created a new branch, master, and master was the local branch, and it pushed it to the server. All right, so now what I should see is if I'm looking at GitHub again, I think I just need to refresh this page. So I'm going to hit the refresh button or press Command R, and I should see my Xcode project. Cool.
Can I ask a couple questions to catch up?
Yep.
How do I find I got lost when I was looking for the file pathway.
For Git?
I don't know how to find out how to type out where my my project is, my About Me project is on my desktop.
Yeah.
I know where it is if I'm looking at folders and stuff, but I don't know how to get it in Terminal.
Yeah, ditto. And then after that, I don't even understand what you were doing because I thought we were like one click away from the About Me file going into the GitHub. And then the next thing you know, you type in like 20. It's like, wow, that took a lot longer than I thought.
Yeah, so this is the process that you have to go through in order to configure it. So in terms of finding this location, I'm going to do pwd for print working directory. That's going to show me where I am. I'm assuming that you're somewhere on your desktop in a projects folder. If you know where it is in the file system, you should be able to get there one file at a time. So what I did, if I type cd, that takes me back to my home directory. If I type pwd, my home directory is this base URL. So this is my home directory. A synonym for this is that tilde character that we see in this very bottom left corner of my screen. And so I can get, if I know mentally where I need to go, I can just start typing the different folder paths. But since you're probably new to this, it's going to take a little bit of practice to know where we are. So maybe switching your view and looking for it. So the trick I did to get to that, if you don't know where your project is, in Xcode, if you go to your project settings, if you right click on it and you do show in Finder and the project navigator, if you look at my screen, this will show you a Finder window where you are, and that will show you the Xcode project. So all I need to do is I have to get into this folder. And if I just slide backwards, it's actually not letting me go any further. This is my desktop I'm looking at. I showed you how to add, if you modified your toolbar, you can see sort of this file hierarchy. So this can help. I also have it enabled along the bottom as well. That's another view option. Under view, there's a hide and show path bar that is this command if you look at my screen. So that will make that bottom bar appear. So I'll click that one more time and I can sort of see this directory. Either one of those are sort of helpful for finding it. And now if I want to jump into it, I know that I need to get onto the desktop. So I'm going to go one folder at a time just to help you. So I'll type CD for change directory and I'll type desktop. That moves me into the desktop. I can type PWD and you can see that I'm one directory deeper. Now I'll do it again, CD, and then in this case I want to go into what's the projects folder, which I see right here. And now if I type PWD, again, I see I'm one level deeper. And then I want to get into the About Me folder. So if I want to see what's in this folder, in this projects folder, the command that we use to do that is ls, which stands for list. And I type that and I can see all of the files here. So now that I know what files are here, I know that I want to get into About Me, which I see in the output. So I'm going to change directory one more time into About Me. If I type ls, I will see my Xcode project, and I will see a folder that has all the source code. Now, once I'm in the About Me, because we already initialized it with Git, assuming that worked for you, if it didn't work for you, create a new Xcode project and enable Git and see if that works again. And you can go into that directory. You can do that after this video if you want to sort of rewatch the process. Once we're in here, we're able to write something like git status. And git status should show us the state of our Git repository. Every project always starts on a branch that's called master. You want to think of branches as kind of like tree limbs. And master just means that's the main one. So if I want to now add this to GitHub, I have to go through those commands that we did before. And that's related to the Git remotes. So I can see what my remotes are here. And if I want to re-add this again, or if I want to add it for the first time, that's where I need to use those commands that were on GitHub. Now, since I refreshed the page on GitHub, it's not showing me those, and I don't think it will. It's not going to show me those again. To get to that screen, you should still have it on your screen if you haven't refreshed and pushed stuff. But I could create another repository just for fun. I'll just call it test git. Oh, I already have one of those. I'll just call it test about me or about me test. So if I go through this process, again, don't check anything here. Just leave it as it is. We're trying to upload the Xcode project, and then I'll hit create repository. Every time we see this, we should see something that looks similar to this. I'll post this in the Slack, just so we have some reference. Now, yours is going to be different than mine. So whatever your username is what you're going to use. Whatever the repository name, and that's going to be whatever you called it. For most of you, you're going to select HTTPS for now. We can configure SSH later, but this will get you going. So select HTTPS. That's going to change the URL that's right here. And so what we need to do is we have to follow the instructions from this point. We have an existing Xcode project that we want to put into the cloud. In order to do that, we need to go through these steps. So you can copy and paste this message from here into here. You can click in Terminal and just do Command V to paste, and that will try to paste it. I already have this added, so it's not going to allow me to add it twice. I would have to remove it to add it again. But that's the steps you need to go through. Does that help, Chris?
Yeah, I was doing it the right way, but it just wasn't. It kept telling me that the directories were not found, so I just renamed everything. I just erased the names and renamed them with like no spaces, and then it worked out fine. I got lost more time.
Did you have spaces?
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't show spaces. So spaces are a little bit tricky. So if I create, I'll make directory, let's just say it's my name. If I do ls, I'm going to see that there's a directory and it's in blue. It's got a space. If I want to cd into Paul Solt, this is not going to work. So in order to get around that, we have to escape the space. And so that means we need to do a \, and then if you press tab, it should autocomplete, or you can write it yourself. So that's how we get into a directory with a space.
You can also do, you can also put in quotation marks.
That's true. So if okay, I'm going to go back a directory. I haven't shown this command. cd ... goes back a directory. So I can go back to where I was. Just to show you where I am now, I'll type pwd. I'm in the About Me folder. I'm going to cd into Paul Solt with quotes, and that should take me into here. I'll pwd so that you can see I'm in this folder that has a space. So spaces become tricky. That's one of the reasons I recommend making your Xcode project not have spaces.
Yeah, I can live without spaces.
Does origin and master mean anything to you, or or should we care about it, or just use it like a recipe and do it?
You can configure that later, but for, I would say 95% of the time, you're always going to use origin and master. We can have multiple versions of the code that we're working on, and that's the concept of branches. And I don't think I have time to get into that now. I don't think it's going to help you with your project right now. So I'm going to punt that for maybe a future discussion. We're going to be working with, let's see, where am I? We're going to be working with GitHub today, and we're going to be using some other features. So I don't want to go too much further with this stuff. This is sort of getting you some exposure. I know these commands are a little bit funky. It's actually going to be a little bit easier to do some of the stuff when we're forking a repository. And so I think for the last 5 minutes, I want to cover that, and then I'll follow up with any other questions back to this. Okay. So today's project, let me pull up sort of what we're doing here. And this is a link I can maybe share with you. This is useful. So this is kind of how GitHub Flow is going to work. And you can check this out later. I just want to give you the link. But what happens is we're going to start with some existing code sometimes, and that might be someone else's project that's open source. That might be your own project, and you want to create a variation of it. And we're going to want to basically create a branch of it. And we call this sort of forking with GitHub, so that we can then make changes, and these are our commits. So adding those files, modifying the code values, updating the user interface. And then what we do is it's called a pull request. The pull request basically is going to allow other people to see our changes, and then they can comment and discuss our code. They can tell us to do a new commits, and they get added to this special web page. And then we can go ahead, make sure that things are working, test our code. The flow for many of your projects is going to be what's called forking. We're going to fork a project, you're going to make changes, and then you'll do a pull request so that your PM can follow along. And so today, what you're going to be doing is you're going to be working on the project Lambda Hello. So if you go to the project page, it's down at the very bottom. I will link it. And this has sort of detailed descriptions, sort of recovering what we talked about today, and telling you what to do. So we are going to do what's called forking. And actually what I want you to do, instead of forking this one, let's fork my new repository. So I'm gonna grab my link, and you should all be able to see this. I'm gonna add a README real quick. And I will save this. So I'll commit. So now I have a README, and now what I want you to do, I'm going to share this link, and I want you to fork and then add your name to the README. So when you come to this page, let's see what it looks like. So I'm going to open another window just to sort of see what it looks like if I'm not signed in. So you should see a clone or download button, and it should look the same as sort of what I'm seeing here. And actually, that's not what we want yet. The fork button's up at the very top. So what you're going to do is you're going to click on fork, and that's going to make a copy of my project to your GitHub account. So this is how we can sort of socially collaborate with code. And you can tell it where you want to fork it. Since it's my personal repository, it's not actually giving me any useful options. I'll just choose Super Easy Apps, which is my company. That will create another copy of it for my company. So it's going to fork it. And then now you're free to edit this. Up in the top left, we're going to see, if you look at my screen, we're going to see that it's telling me where it's forked from. Over on the right, we'll see that other people have modified it and or basically created their own thing. So many of you are now here. If I refresh this, the number should be maybe higher. And now you have the option to edit it. So you can clone this and edit it, or to keep things a little bit simpler right now, let's just edit the README directly online. So you should see a little pencil here. I want you to click that, and I want you to just add your name as a simple test. If you scroll to the bottom, you can say added my name, and then commit that change to master. Okay, so that's going to update your version. That's not going to update my version. And so this is where the pull request comes in. So if we jump back to, let's see, if we click on the pull request tab, we should be able to create a new pull request. And this is where you can notify me that you've made a change. So the way this works is you say new pull request, and you should be able to see the changes. We'll see a visual version of the diff that we've seen on the terminal. We'll have some green highlighting on any lines that we've added. And it will tell you a check mark if it's able to merge. And then what we'll do is we click this green button to create a pull request. So when you do this, you're going to say, added my name to the README. You can modify it however you want. You can add additional comments if you need to clarify. And then if you hit create pull request, let's see, what else do I have here? So there's an option to draft it, and there's an option to create it right away. So if you're ready to, and you're finished with whatever you're working on, this will send a message back to me now. So I click this button, and now what's going to happen is I'm going to have some pull requests. And Xcode's going to tell me if it can automatically merge. So I'm going to wait and sort of see what happens here. And as long as I have a green icon, I can merge this pull request. So it's a little bit confusing, but I have 2 copies of this project, and I have there's 25 other copies of this same code. So we're socially sort of working on the project, and it looks like 12 of you have submitted a pull request. So if I look at the list of pull requests, I can see all of you who have made a change to my README. And now I can go one by one if I want to, and I can merge these pull requests. So I can dig into this, and if I want to see what has changed, let's see. The commits tab is right here, and I can see some details, and I actually want to see what changed. I think I have to click this, and I could see this is Taylor. And so if I want to review this change, I could say something like, looks good. And then I could submit the review. This is going to add some sort of social interaction. So now that I've done this, Taylor can see that I've given him feedback on his code change. And then I can continue to merge this completely. So the merge is where we sort of put things together. So if I want his name in my README, I confirm the merge. And now that is merged, we'll see a new symbol. If I want to comment anymore, I'm able to do that to continue the discussion with Taylor. And then if we go back to my code, we will now see that Taylor's name is here. And if I want to get someone else's pull request, let's go to my other pull requests. I'm going to try and grab Alex's. So let's see what happens here. All right, so this is going to be a challenge. I now have a conflict because both Alex and Taylor modified the same file. And so this is what version control is sort of set up to help us with. It's going to show me some changes. And it looks like Alex put his name maybe above add my name here, or he removed that. So if I want to get both of these, I can modify this. And what you have to do is you basically have to remove these special symbols, and they show me 2 different things. Master shows me what I have coming from one of the versions, and it's actually not very useful because one's from Alex and one's from me. But I can see this is what Alex had changed. If I want his name in the list, I might have to modify this a little bit. So let's say I want Alex in the list. I'm going to move his name down, and I'm going to get rid of this, and I'm going to get rid of this. And by doing that, and maybe I'll put a space here. By doing that, I now have 2 different names, and I can mark this as resolved, and then I can commit this merge. So this is one way to merge conflicts. We could go a lot further than this. I just want to show you how I can sort of resolve some changes online. If I refresh, I should see, did I commit that? I don't think I actually finished that. So I made a commit that modified it, and now I need to actually still finish the merge. And so I will commit, and this will give me one more name on the final code. So this will change, and I should be able to see both names when I refresh. And I'm not for some reason.
They're both there. They're just on the same line.
Oh, okay. Yep. There we go. So if I want to fix that, I need to add another new line here. And then I can commit that real quick. And so we can see those 2 names. Ideally, I would want to probably put that in a list, but we didn't do it that way. So that's kind of a starting point for GitHub. You will be forking a lot of projects in Lambda School, and then you will be making your own changes. Then you will be creating pull requests so that your PMs can see what you're working on. And that's how we can grade your challenges at the end of the week, and that's how we can check up on you and make sure that your apps are working. And if we're doing pair programming, you can share your link, and you should be able to add a collaborator to your project. So let's see if I can confirm here. So I should be able to add Julian. So Julian's GitHub, I think, is this. Maybe I don't need the @
Yeah, that's my GitHub.
So if I click this and I add collaborator, now Julian is able to collaborate with me on my About Me page. So if I wanted him to, he could continue merging those pull requests and fixing the code. And this is how you can pair program. So that's a brief overview. We're going to have this recording so that you can watch this again and sort of follow along if you want to. And I will answer any other questions. Otherwise, we're done for now. So if you don't want to stick around and ask questions, you can get started on the actual afternoon project.
Are we still adding what is that, the PM callouts or whatever? Are we still doing that? Or we put the @ symbol and never mind.
Yeah, so when you do a pull request, we were talking about tagging your PM. So for this pull request, I could write a comment, and I should be able to tag someone in the repository, and I could maybe try, I don't know if I can get Julian, but let's see. I'll ask him, can you review this commit? There's a conflict. So I'll comment, and we should see that this links to Julian. And now he's getting a ping. He should get an email or a notification that I've mentioned him, and he can come in here and try and fix it. Can I get a 1 to 3 rating on getting started with GitHub and forking? Okay, awesome. I would say one final thing is the last command that we didn't cover is cloning, and your PMs might have talked about this yesterday. If I want to clone a repository, you can copy the HTTPS version by just copying this. You can click this little button, and if I wanted to copy, let's say you wanted to clone my repository, the last thing I'll do, I'm going to go back a directory, and I want to do, let's see, I'll make a new directory. I'm just going to be in a test directory in my projects folder. I'm going to do a git clone. This is the last command that you're going to need to be familiar with. And I'm going to copy this URL, and I'm going to paste it. And then you should be able to have that new project. And so now you can go into it and you can make changes. So anytime you clone, and then if I want to, I can open that README. And what we'll see is the local copy of what was online is now on my desktop. So that's what you'll be doing with every project in the afternoons.
I had the same issue as Chris earlier with the spacebar thing. Can you just go over, once we have our About Me in the terminal, how to get it uploaded?
So with the spacebar,
yeah, I figured it out. It's just after that point of accessing the About Me.
to get it online?
Correct.
Yeah, so that's going to be specific to whatever your GitHub project was. So you need to find that GitHub repository that you set up, and then on that web page, it should have instructions about how to post it. So I'll jump into my new test project if I can find it. So on a brand new GitHub repository, it's going to have a lot of text. This text is actually important to read. For a existing Xcode project, you're going to follow the steps that you should see here. Your username needs to be whatever yours is. And so you can just sort of follow that along. Do you see?
Okay, we just copy and paste that. Yeah, I have that page open.
Yeah, just copy and paste that into Terminal and it should work.
Okay, I got it. Thanks.
Awesome. All right, so I don't have anything else. We're going to, I think, end this now, and you are free to go to your projects. John, if you want to just chat real quick, I can follow up with you. Otherwise, we're done.